Well, good morning, everybody. Last night, the skies cleared out and winds calmed down in pockets of the Pacific Northwest, here along the Snake River Valley, and here in parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the UP of Michigan. And as a result of those calmer conditions, clear skies, plus a lack of any sort of sustained warmth coming out of the south, these areas did touch freezing. In fact, we have a spot here that did have a freeze warning that was issued in the northeast corner of Washington. I want to show you the surface observations there. If we just kind of take a quick look up, notice this surface station here, the model, has a closed circle with no wind barb. So that closed circle with no wind barb indicates calm winds. And around Spokane this morning, temperatures dropped down to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The dew point was actually at 28 as well, so we might have had some freezing fog issues here early this morning as well. As you know, the West has struggled to pick up heat this spring, and while we have a narrative that we've been forming all week suggesting that that's going to change in a big way once we get into the month of June, it's still quite chilly in this area this morning. I'll take you quickly over to parts of the upper Midwest, and again, you notice that the areas where we have kind of the closed circles with no wind barbs, that's where our temperatures dropped off the coldest this morning. Where the winds pick up, you've got better mixing in the lower atmosphere. Plus, this is a south wind. We're just pulling warm air up from the south here in this area. So these were our areas that we were keeping a close eye on this morning with respect to the frost. And if you look at the satellite data, let me take you to this morning. You can see how clear it is around the Great Lakes. And the sun's not yet risen here in the northwest as I was recording this, but you can see the skies cleared out there last night as well. Now, the complex of storms that's been in the middle part of the country, they were hailers yesterday. This was some pretty strong storms that ran north and south, and some of them have survived into the early morning. We're going to talk about those in a few moments down here in the southern plains. But this complex of storms is not going to move quickly to the east. There's a ridge that's kind of here in the atmosphere that's kind of keeping this slow and not progressing quickly to the east. But I would like to take you back to last night as those storms kind of popped off here. A lot of them are producing hail, but I want you to see kind of the haze that's in the atmosphere. So much of this, which is easier to see on the satellite imagery as the sun is setting, is from smoke from Mexico. Now, it's not as though you go out there and you can just see the smoke in the northern plains, but it's just easier to see on satellite when you get these more oblique angles where the sunlight strikes the sky at a more oblique angle and gives us a better scatter of that smoke. You can still see the wildfires down here in Mexico, though. Now, some of these storms yesterday, again, produced some large hail, and they're just slowly moving their way toward the east. And if we look at some radar data, just here starting late last night through early this morning, the storms that I've been watching most carefully are these going through parts of central Kansas. In fact, if we take a closer look, there were storms trying to roll through some of the driest spots in the country compared to average, that central Kansas, western Kansas region. And I'm thankful that these storms are relatively slow. I mean, this is a long animation. This is 12:50 in the morning all the way through about 6:20 when I was recording this morning. So great to see some slow-moving storms getting into that particular region. Now, hail, just wanted to mention, we had it north to south. And again, we're adding up more and more of these reports. As you heard me talk about earlier this week, we're at like 135% of average on tornadoes, 170+% of average on wind reports. And hail is probably about 110 to 112% of our historical averages through this point in the year. And tomorrow, given it's the last day of May, we'll kind of do a quick summary of all of what May has delivered, just as a good way to wrap up one month and start a new one. As we start this new month, so much of my attention is going to be given to the wind field, not here in the U.S., but mainly over the Pacific. Because what we've got right now today is a low that's kind of forming here up in parts of Canada. And out ahead of it, there's that ridge I mentioned. All right. So this is just slow. There's no west to east in this. You just notice most of the flow is going like this and then wrapping its way, around a low in the northern, in the Canadian prairie. Now, my attention is back here. And as I kind of flip this around, we're watching just flow here and here. And what I'm very curious about is how this is going to be disruptive to what's been really permanent, these ridges. See, there's one there and there's one here. And what's happened is the flows come over it, and down. And we want to know if these lows have the ability to kind of perturb and change, especially this one, with the kicker on the backside being the remnants of this typhoon. So let's just think this through. Today, our severe weather threat comes back into the southern plains, and we'll take a look at that on radar in a few moments. But I am quite concerned about the evolution of the second round of storms today that dives into this area. Because if we could get a large squall line out of this, some of the models are suggesting that the northern edge wraps itself up into a rather large, well, it starts off as a bookend vortex and turns into what we call a mesoscale convective vortex that could roll all the way up here through Missouri into Illinois. I'll show you that because if you look, as we get into the day on the 31st, we're again watching the overnight hours into early tomorrow down here in Texas. And as we play this forward, it's still resetting in the plains because of where the flow is. But I'll show you this event that I think we'll get in on Saturday into parts of Illinois here in a few moments. We have 4 more days really to watch for severe weather this week. This will take us all the way out there to Sunday. And you can see that the day 4 outlook is really in the upper Midwest, Western Corn Belt, Northern Plains coming out of South Dakota into Minnesota with the strong to severe storms. So they have issued a day 4, 15% coverage area right in through here. So let's now get in and see what kind of the pieces are that are creating this. I want to look at some vorticity maps. I think this is going to be fascinating. So through the middle of the day today, we still have our trough sitting and spinning here with the ridge out ahead of it, keeping it slower. But as we watch storms here getting into tomorrow, coming out of the southern plains, what I'll be most interested in, I know it doesn't look like much, but it's this little shortwave right here. Because some of the models are taking the northern end and kind of coupling this with the deep convection we're expecting and producing a small little vortex that's going to roll right into this area. Now, this is kind of second to the bigger upper level load that's all stacked up here, which is why this system isn't moving very far by Friday, even into Saturday. But after we get through this weekend and start playing into early next week, a couple of things happen. Our storm track shifts to the north. You saw on Sunday the risk is here in the northern plains. But we really see a lot of flow kind of coming in this direction. This is early next week on Tuesday, getting out there toward Wednesday. Now, by Wednesday, this is the 5th, we're going to watch for a lot of heat to be building into the western United States under this ridge. And this trough is going to want to live in this area for a while. And this is going to allow heat to really ride up the western part of the United States. And as I play you out there toward the 6th and 7th, we start to get ourselves into kind of this high over low blocking scenario. So the high is here, the low is there. And what's interesting about this particular type of flow is you end up getting something like this at times. And this can really light up the parts of the Southwest with storms. But it's a blocking pattern. It's one that, well, there's more north-south flow than west to east. And downstream with a bigger trough of low pressure over the Great Lakes, there's not a whole lot of reason for this pattern to progress. And this is the ridge we're going to have to watch to see how long it's going to stick around in that area. Okay, with all of that, let's now come back to the forecast. I do want to point out that the models have missed the cluster of storms in their initialization that are right now rolling through this part of Texas as I'm recording this. If I go back here and show it to you, it's these. They did not capture these. They got what's going on in Kansas, but not here. Now, the reason why I'm telling you that is because if they've missed the initialization of those storms, they're not in the simulation, which is going to affect the accuracy and the skill of the model. But as it stands, we're going to progress storms throughout the day today, just a bit farther to the east, as you can see here. One system's going to exit parts of the northeast and scattered storms that'll roll right into this area. Now, this is this afternoon into this evening. What I am really going to watch carefully is this evening, some of the models are attempting, we kind of mentioned this at the beginning, putting a large squall line in this area that could just slide south. See that? And that could produce damaging winds. We could see the potential, it's there in the models, for an overnight kind of large squall line bow echo feature. Okay, it's showing up not only in the NAM, but it's in the HER. And this is why they've got that risk out today and then into tomorrow in this area for the risk of these strong to severe storms. Meanwhile, the front here we are, 24 hours from now, and it's, still not pushed very far to the east. Now, if you notice, watch this. Here's that bookend vortex. It's a big one that ends up on the end of this in the model simulations. And it turns itself into a pretty large mesoscale convective vortex. And it rolls right across Missouri and into Illinois by the time we get into early morning Saturday. And that's a rainmaker, a slow rainmaker hitting this particular area. So we need to see what comes of that and if the models truly have that right. You're probably looking at going, man, it looks like a hurricane. Well, that's what mesoscale convective vortexes do look like, but they don't have hurricane force winds, but they kind of spin up like that. So there is no big synoptic scale low or deep trough creating this. It's all driven by the thunderstorm dynamics. And there it is, rolling right across parts of Illinois. Okay, bigger picture things. Watch this wave train here. This is Thursday from the European ensemble, getting into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So as I mentioned, we have this northern U.S. storm track taking over into early June. But the questions we have, which have been shown up all week long in the model, is that by the time we get to June 4th and 5th, this ridge takes over. We've displaced the downstream pattern. See, there's broad ridging here as well. That's pushing this trough over parts of Scandinavia. This is why there's the potential, as you get out there into the first week of June, of returning some rain into the dry parts of the Russian wheat belt. Okay, so before we had a trough here, that's the wrong place. If it's here, remember that you get the flow coming out of its eastern side, giving you the best chances for some moisture. But this whole pattern is beginning to just take a little bit of a change. And by the 6th and the 7th and the 8th, our question that we will continue to ask is, can this ridge hang on? Now I'll tell you, the longer we keep a low here and a trough there, the longer it'll live. And it'll just keep this feature out into open ocean. So we see it out there in the 8th and the 9th and the 10th. Some of the models, some of the operational models, not the ensembles, are attempting to kind of break this down around the 11th, 12th, and 13th. It's not showing up well in the ensemble, but it does appear that we're going to have about a week of pretty significant western U.S. ridging. And what I want to know is, does it get stuck? And that's going to be a question I don't think I'll be able to answer until we get to probably the 7th, 8th, and 9th of June. So that's what I want you to be watching for, because this pattern appears to be, as we look out there toward the middle of the month, still there in some way, shape, or form. Okay, let's get into what this means. Over the next 7 days, we've got the system rolling through here right in the near term and the heavy rains that's going to result from that. We then have this northern U.S. storm track, including the low that's still stacked up here that slowly moves over this area. So that's where a lot of this precipitation is coming from. Here it is in the national blend of models. Take note, a lot of the southeast in the national blend of models is drier. Parts of the east coast are drier as well. Most of our wet weather's here. If we look at the WPC, we see that the WPC brings a bit more moisture into the Ohio River Valley than the other forecast models did, but overall a similar look. The European model, sorry about that, is shown here. It's got a very similar outlook to the WPC. And then finally we have the GFS. But if you just have to distill this down into a couple of ideas, this is the European ensemble's next 7 days average precipitation anomalies. And we can see kind of the setup of this pattern where the wettest conditions are. And then if we do build in the big ridge in the west with the low off the California coast, what we end up getting is flow that comes over the top like this. There's a trough in here, so east of it is where the wetter weather is going to be. But then there's the cutoff low that sits in this area, which is why we start to see the storms showing up in this particular region. Okay? That's what's given us this setup as we work our way out there past the 5th, 6th, and 7th. To show to you on the models, I got the GFS on the left and the European on the right. As we play this forward, we've already seen through Friday into Saturday. So it's, again, going to be watching this storm cluster Friday, getting into Saturday to see if it does produce. It's in both models. See this? Coming across Missouri, that mesoscale convective vortex potentially dumping a lot of rain through this corridor right in here. Heavy rains to the south as well. But playing into the weekend, here's our next low coming in. There's actually a frontal boundary out ahead of this, really getting pumped with moisture. That's going to give us the chance for storms Sunday. Remember, we're going to watch this area right in through here, really more into there on Sunday. And as we play from Sunday into Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, that's the last one. Can you see it? Watch right here. Slides down, curls up over the Great Lakes, and then it's going to try to live there. From the 6th, 7th, and 8th. Do you see that? Look at it just sitting and spinning in this area. I'm looking at both models, but I'm focusing on the Euro. And if that low stays there, see this right in through here? This is because the flow came over the top, curls itself up, low sits off California, helps to pull in moisture, and we're going to see storms in this area. Okay, if that pans out, this is our probability maps. Chance of an inch in the next week. Stretch it out to 10 days. Do you see how it's kind of filling in on the backside here? That could be the potential kind of moisture pull from that low that's sitting in California. But there's no doubt that over the next 7 days, we've still got this active corridor in this region. Okay, what about getting out there to week 2? There it is. Showing up in all 3 models, sorry. But over the top, drier into this area. I really like these forecasts. They make a lot of sense to me. So maybe that's a bad thing. If they start making sense, then maybe I'm conflating or ideas or confirming biases. I don't know. But let's move on to temperatures. We've talked about the frost this morning, so a lot of this was this morning, here and here. As we look at these max temperatures over the next 7 days, I'm keeping a close eye on California. There's Friday getting into Saturday. Into Sunday, heat really coming into the plains here on Sunday and Monday. Remember, we're going to watch some strong storms on Sunday in this area. But watch the northwest. This is that last trough coming in Monday, Tuesday. There it goes into Wednesday. Now, starting on Wednesday the 5th, triple-digit heat coming up through the Central Valley of California. And it seems like it's going to last the 6th and the 7th. They've already got a high risk of excessive heat in California's Central Valley. And throughout much of the west under that large ridge, they're expecting to have, from the 6th to the 12th, the risk of a lot of heat. You can see it here in the next 7 days of GDDs. We're pouring in some better heat into the middle part of the country once the cooler air exits. So now we're looking at picking up to 120 GDDs as far north as this Minneapolis. Minneapolis about 144 GDDs. But that California heat wave that's coming through is really beginning to show up. You can see it in the day 5 through 10, and here's the day 10 through 15. So our big question will be, once we get to about the 12th of June, are we still in this? And what happens to this ridge and how long does it stick around? That will be the big question to try to answer. Okay, something else to think about here. If we look out at what's going on in the upper levels of the atmosphere, there's a lot of suppression here and rising motion here, moving right over this part of the Eastern Pacific in the Caribbean and parts of the Western Atlantic and this section of South America. And why I'm thinking a lot about this is that this is a part of the whole pattern change. So the Pacific and where the rising motion is also starting to shift around a bit. And I did note that if we look over the next week or so, there does appear to be chances for some tropical development in this area. And I'm curious what that's going to mean longer term for the rainfall in this region, which includes the Panama Canal. And if we could possibly see some tropical development coming out in this area as we approach the beginning of June. As it stands over the next 15 days, take note of this. And there's just some question as to whether or not we're going to get something developing here and something developing here in the tropics. Now, I tried to pull this up earlier. Let's see if it did. Okay, it loaded. This is that lake in the Panama Canal that is so critical to the Panama Canal's efficiency. It's back up to 81 feet. And for some perspective, we're in June. If you look at, we'll just kind of look at the June data. I hope this loads. It was so slow this morning. It may not load. It should be about anywhere between 86 and 88 feet, okay? And let's see if it'll show up here. Maybe I can just hover over it. There you go. So these normal years, if you just look at the graph, I can't hover over it. But do you see how like in 2021 and 2022, it was 85 to 86 feet? And then in like 19 and 23, it was down there around 79. We've got to get this lake level back up to that 6-7 feet more than it is now in order for it, I think, to really operate in an efficient way. So I just wanted to bring up the speed on the Panama Canal. But as you saw, let's actually go back to that. Where is it? We are expecting a lot of wet weather in this area to maybe help fill that lake up through the drainage out of the mountains. Okay, from there, let's get beyond those and go here. Globally, you saw the trough moving through Europe, and that is why the models are trying to put down some wetter conditions into parts of the very dry sections of the Russian wheat belt, which we've been thinking quite a bit about lately. I do want you to note how wet it continues to stay in Southeast Asia, south of the Yangtze River. A lot of wet weather for this time of year. It's autumn, late autumn, going in toward winter into Australia. Some critical rains happening in that area. We're still drier in Rio Grande do Sul, southern Brazil. Overall, the monsoon is done. The dry season has set in here for a big section of Brazil. But I do want to compare this to the AIFS model. This is the artificial intelligence. Because if that wet weather stays north, that will be critical because I'm curious about this. There's the Black Sea. What about this southern Russia and parts of Ukraine? And I just think about that because during this time frame, it's getting very hot in that area. Temperatures could be 10 to 20 degrees above average for about a 10-day stretch in here. So if it rains, does the rain actually do anything, or is it just too hot for that moisture to really be used, or is it evaporated? That'll be a question we'll be asking. And I do want to show you one last thing. This would be the 4th of June to the 4th of July, looking globally. And I take note here that the newest model runs are drier around the Black Sea, something to watch for. And as we noted, we're expecting drier conditions here, but ridge-running storms taking over at some point mid to late June. And just kind of take a quick look globally at that stretch of days from the 4th of June to the 4th of July, just to kind of let it settle in what the models are picking up on the pattern. So I'll wrap all this up tomorrow in one last forecast video. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.